The diner smelled like coffee grounds and butter every morning, and Emma Calloway had stopped noticing it years ago. She moved between the tables with the kind of practiced ease that only comes from doing something long enough, that your body does it without your mind asking permission. She refilled cups before they were empty, remembered orders without writing them down, and smiled at every customer like they were the first person she'd been happy to see all day. She was 26, and she had been working at Millie's diner on the corner of Hartwell and Fifth since she was 18. 8 years of early mornings, aching feet, and tips that sometimes covered her half of the rent and sometimes did not. Her mother, Renee, lived 2 blocks away in a small apartment that always smelled of cinnamon because Renee baked whenever she was anxious. And Renee was anxious most of the time. Emma sent her money when she could and visited every Sunday. And those 2 things were the shape of her love for her mother. She had a dream, but she kept it folded up small inside her chest where it stayed warm. She wanted a bakery. Not a big one, not something grand or famous. Just a corner spot somewhere in the neighborhood with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard. Menu and bread that made people stop walking and look up. She had a notebook full of recipes she had been collecting since she was 14. She had saved a little money. Not enough, but a little. That Tuesday morning in October was like every other Tuesday morning until the bell above. The door rang at 7:40, and Harrison Blake walked in. Emma noticed him the way you notice something that does not quite belong in a room. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. And he was looking around the diner with an expression that was not quite contempt, but was close enough to it that Emma felt her jaw tighten. He had dark hair, slightly disheveled in a way that seemed accidental, sharp jaw, and eyes the color of deep water. He was the kind of handsome that rich men sometimes were, the kind that came with good tailoring and regular sleep, and no real worry about where the next meal was coming from. He sat at the counter without being shown to a seat. That was how Emma knew he did not eat at places like Millie's very often. She walked over and set down a laminated menu in front of him. He looked at it briefly, and then looked up at her. His eyes were gray. She saw then not quite blue, gray like November sky. "What's actually good here?" he asked. His voice was low and a little rough, like someone who had already been on phone calls for 2 hours before walking through the door. "Everything," Emma said, because that was what she always said, and because it was mostly true. He looked at her steadily. "I meant it as a real question." She studied him for a second. "The eggs are fresh from a farm 40 minutes outside the city. The coffee is strong enough to make you reconsider your morning plans. The blueberry pancakes are the best thing on the menu, but they take longer than most people want to wait." "I'll have the pancakes," he said. "And the coffee." She poured his cup and moved on. She had regulars to take care of, a booth of construction workers who came in every morning and tipped generously. An elderly woman named Dorothy, who always ordered oatmeal and always complained it was too hot. Emma took care of them all with the same easy warmth, and when she came back to refill Harrison's coffee 15 minutes later, she had almost forgotten about him. He was looking at his phone but not really seeing it. That was the impression she got. He was somewhere else entirely. "Long morning?" she asked without thinking, because that was the kind of thing she always said to customers, who looked like the world was sitting on them. He looked up and seemed surprised that she had spoken. "Something like that." "The pancakes will help," she said. "They don't solve anything, but they make the problems feel further away for a while." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not read. Then something in his face shifted just slightly, not a smile exactly, but close. "That might be the most honest thing anyone has said to me in weeks," he said. She set the coffee pot down and leaned against the counter just for a moment. "What do people usually say to you?" "That everything is fine. That the reports look great. That I'm making excellent decisions." His voice was flat. "And are you?" He picked up his coffee cup. "I genuinely don't know." The pancakes came out and she set them in front of him and watched his face do something quiet and private when he took the first bite. She had seen that expression on people before, the expression of being genuinely surprised by something simple. It was one of her favorite things about this job. He came back the next morning. In the morning after that, by the fourth morning, Diana, who was Emma's best friend and the other full-time waitress at Millie's, had developed opinions about the situation. Diana was 28 and practical about most things, and romantic about the rest. "He keeps sitting at your section," Diana said during a lull. "Refilling the sugar dispensers at the service counter." "He's just a regular," Emma said. "Regulars sit wherever there's a free seat. He waits for your section to have one." Emma did not answer that because she had noticed it too, and she did not know what to do with it. His name was Harrison. She found that out on the third morning when she asked, because she made a point of learning her regulars' names. He told her, and then asked hers. And when she said Emma, he repeated it once quietly, like he was placing it somewhere safe. She found that quietly alarming in a way she was not prepared to examine, he told her. In pieces, over those mornings at the counter, that his car had broken down that first Tuesday 2 blocks away, and he had walked in because it was the nearest place open. He told her that he lived in a penthouse on the north side of the city, but that he had an office on Hartwell, which was why he kept coming back. He did not tell her he owned 8 companies and a private island and had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. But she found that out when Diana looked him up on her phone and showed Emma in the break room on the 4th day. "Harrison Blake," Diana said, holding up the screen. "CEO of Blake Global Investments. Net worth estimated at $3.2 billion with a B." Emma stared at the photo, which showed a very polished version of the man who sat at her counter every morning with rumpled hair and an expression that suggested he was tired all the way down to his bones. "He eats here because the pancakes are good," she said finally. "Or because you're here," Diana said. Emma handed the phone back. "Don't do that. I'm just saying what I see." What Diana saw became harder to ignore on the 6th morning. When Celeste Worthington walked into Millie's diner at 8:15 in a cream-colored coat that swept the floor and looked at the vinyl booths and the laminated menus with naked disdain. She was beautiful in an architectural way, sharp and deliberate. And she walked directly to where Harrison was sitting at the counter and put her hand on his shoulder without asking. "I've been calling you," she said to him. She had not looked at Emma at all. "I know," Harrison said. His voice had gone flat. Celeste then looked at Emma, slowly, the way people look at things they are evaluating for removal. "Could you get me a sparkling water?" she said. "Or do you only serve filter here?" "We have still and we have filter," Emma said evenly. "Course you do." She said it pleasantly, which was worse than if she had said it with spite. Emma walked to get the water. She heard Celeste behind her, lowering her voice in that way people do when they want to be overheard. "Harrison, really? Every morning? This place?" "I like it here," he said. "It smells like bacon grease." "I know. I like that too." Emma set the water in front of Celeste without looking at her. Celeste picked it up, glanced at the glass like it had offended her, and set it back down. "I suppose everyone needs their little quirks," she said. And the word little was aimed precisely at Emma. Emma turned away and began wiping down the counter at the other end. She kept her face smooth. She was good at that. Years of difficult customers had taught her that dignity lived in the spine, not the expression. She heard the stool scrape. Then Harrison was standing beside her. "Hey," he said quietly. She looked up. "She was rude, and I'm sorry," he said. "That was not okay." Emma looked at him for a moment. Men like him did not usually notice, let alone say anything. "You don't need to apologize for other people," she said. "I wanted to," he said. "And I want you to know that I'm going to keep coming back every morning. And she won't be here again." Emma felt something warm and fragile settle in her chest. The beginning of something she was not sure she was ready for. "The pancakes will be here," she said carefully. He almost smiled. It reached his eyes this time. "That's enough reason," he said. But the way he said it, looking directly at her, suggested he meant something more than pancakes. And Emma, for the first time in a long time, let herself consider the possibility that someone unexpected might be about to change everything. Emma had never worn heels to work before. She had never owned a badge that opened doors, or sat in a chair that adjusted 12 different ways, or received a phone call from a woman named Greta, who spoke in precise clipped sentences and told her that her start date at Blake Global Investments would be Monday morning at 8 sharp, and that business casual was the expectation, but formal was always welcome. She stood in front of her closet on Sunday night and stared at her clothes for a long time. Diana sat on the edge of her bed eating crackers and offering opinions that were mostly unhelpful. "The navy dress," Diana said, "it's for weddings, so you're entering a new life. That qualifies." Emma pulled out the navy dress and looked at it. It was simple and fitted, and she had bought it 2 years ago for her cousin's wedding and worn it exactly once. She hung it on the door. Then she sat on the floor, and Diana came and sat beside her, and they were quiet for a while in the way that best friends can be. "You don't have to do this," Diana said. "Not unkindly. I know," Emma said. "Then why are you?" Emma thought about that. She thought about the mornings at the counter and the way Harrison looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that was exactly what it claimed to be. She thought about the conversation they had shared 3 days after the Celeste incident, when he had come in early and the diner was quiet and they had talked for almost an hour about her bakery dream, about the notebook full of recipes, about how she wanted mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. He had listened with his full attention, which was the rarest thing she had ever been given by anyone. "Because he asked me like he meant it," she said finally, "and I'm tired of playing it safe." Diana bumped her shoulder gently. "Then wear the navy dress and go be terrifying." Blake Global occupied 4 floors of a glass tower on Michigan Avenue. The lobby had a waterfall feature and a reception desk staffed by 2 people who both looked like they had been assembled from a catalog. Emma walked in on Monday morning with her notebook tucked under her arm and the navy dress and shoes that were slightly too new, and found her way to the 14th floor where Harrison's executive team operated Greta, who turned out to be a small woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and an expression that suggested she had seen everything twice and been impressed by none of it. Walked Emma through the space without breaking stride. There was a workstation for her outside a row of glass-walled offices. There was a schedule, a login, a password, a stack of binders that needed organizing. There was a coffee machine that cost more than Emma's monthly salary at the diner and produced results that were not as good as what she made at Millie's every morning. Harrison's office was at the end of the hall. He stopped by her workstation at 8:40 and said, "Good morning," in the same voice he used at the counter, and she felt herself breathe again for the first time since the elevator. "How's the chair?" he asked. "It adjusts 12 ways," she said. 14 if you read the manual. I'll get right on that." He almost smiled. "Greta will take care of you. She takes care of everything. If someone gives you trouble, tell me." He walked back to his office, and Emma turned to her binders and got to work. The trouble came in small ways at first. A woman named Patricia from the investment analysis team who looked at Emma's workstation with an expression like she had smelled something and kept looking. A group of 3 men in identical gray suits who went quiet when Emma walked past the break room and then started talking again, just loudly enough that she could catch fragments. Words like favor and charity case and you know why she's here. Emma kept her face smooth and her spine straight and did her work and said nothing. By Wednesday, she had organized the filing. A system that had apparently been a disaster for 2 years, and Greta had looked at it with an expression that might have been respect from a distance. "How did you know to sort by acquisition date instead of alphabetically?" Greta asked. "It made more sense for how the documents flow," Emma said. "Alphabetical is for libraries. Business files should follow the way decisions actually happen." Greta looked at her for a long moment. "You're smarter than you look," she said. It was not a compliment exactly, but coming from Greta felt like one. On Thursday, Tricia stopped by Emma's workstation during lunch. She set her hands flat on the desk and leaned in slightly and smiled with all her teeth. "So how long have you known him?" she asked, meaning Harrison. The way she said it carried everything else she was implying without needing to say any of it. "I've been here for days," Emma said. "That's not what I asked." Emma set down her pen and looked at Patricia directly. "I was his waitress. He thought I'd be good at this job. That's the whole story." "Of course it is," Patricia said, and walked away. Emma picked up her pen again. Her hand was steady. Her chest was not. She did not tell Harrison. She told herself it was because it was not serious enough to mention. But the truth was, she was afraid of what it meant if she told him. Afraid of what it would confirm about the distance between his world and hers. What she did not know was that Harrison was watching. Not in a surveillance way. Not the way men sometimes watched women they were unsure of. He watched the way you watch someone you were trying to protect without them knowing they need protecting. He noticed the way Emma held herself slightly more carefully each day. The way her smiles at the office were smaller and more controlled than the ones she gave customers at the diner. He noticed and he said nothing because he was also afraid. And his fear was that he had pulled her out of the one place. She had been genuinely comfortable and dropped her into a world that would do what his world always did, two things that were real and warm and honest. His father called on Friday afternoon. Preston Blake was 71 years old and had built the foundation of Blake Global from a regional brokerage into something large enough that his son could turn it into an empire. He was proud of this in the way that men who build things are proud, which is to say, completely and without room for anyone else's version of the story. He had opinions about Harrison's company and Harrison's life and Harrison's romantic choices that he delivered as facts. "I've heard you've installed some kind of waitress in the office," Preston said. He was in his estate in Connecticut, and his voice came through the phone with the clarity of a man who had always had good equipment. "Her name is Emma Calloway, and she's doing excellent work," Harrison said. "I'm sure she is. I'm sure she's doing all kinds of work." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Say what you mean, Dad." "I mean that you are the CEO of a publicly traded company, and your personal distractions have consequences that extend beyond your feelings. I mean that I have already had 2 board members call me this week asking questions. I mean that whatever this is needs to end before it becomes a story. It's not a distraction." "Then what is it?" Harrison did not answer that immediately because the honest answer was that he did not have words for it yet. What Emma was to him lived somewhere deeper than language. In the part of him that had been quiet and cold for years and had started warming up from the inside out without his permission. "Leave it alone," he said finally. Preston left nothing alone. That was not how he had built what he built. Over the following week, Harrison felt the pressure from every direction. Preston called daily. 2 board members requested meetings that were really interrogations about his judgment. Celeste reappeared, this time at a charity gala that Harrison was obligated to attend, and she smiled for photographs and stood beside him like she belonged there, and said things in his ear that were designed to sound like concern, but were actually architecture, building a case. And Harrison did something that he would later identify as the worst mistake of his life. He began to pull back. It was not a decision exactly. It was erosion. He stopped stopping by Emma's workstation in the mornings. He took meetings during lunch. He responded to her messages about work with short professional replies. He told himself he was protecting her from the attention that the distance would let the whispers die down. That it was the responsible thing Emma noticed on the 3rd day. By the 5th day, she had stopped expecting the morning hello. By the end of the 2nd week, she was doing her work with the precision of someone who has decided that the work is all there is. Diana came to visit her at the apartment on a Thursday night and found her sitting at the kitchen table with the recipe, notebook open in front of her, and a cup of tea that had gone cold. "Tell me," Diana said. Sitting down across from her, Emma told her everything. The distance, the silence, the feeling of having walked into a room, and then the room rearranging itself around her until she could not find the door. "He's pulling away," Emma said. "I don't know why. Maybe his father said something. Maybe he realized what everyone else seems to already know, that I don't belong there." "You belong wherever you decide to belong," Diana said with the firmness of someone who has believed this for a long time. "Diana, Emma." They looked at each other across the table. "I'm going to talk to him," Emma said. Not with anger, but with the quitter self of a person who has spent too long swallowing things that deserve to be said. She went to his office the next morning before anyone else arrived. Harrison was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled. looking at something on his screen with the expression she recognized from the diner, the one that meant he was somewhere far away and not fully present. She closed the door behind her. He looked up. "I need to say something," she said, "and I need you to let me say it before you respond." He nodded once. "I know you've been pulling back. I know something changed. And I'm not angry. I'm just asking you to be honest with me because I can handle the truth. What I cannot handle is being disappeared on. Not again." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she hated it, but she kept going. "I came here because you asked me to, and because I wanted to be somewhere you were. I learned the systems, and I reorganized the files, and I have handled every person in this building who made me feel like something you dragged in off the street. I have done all of that without complaint. And I am standing here now telling you that if you want me to go, I will go, but I need you to say it to my face." She stopped speaking. The office was very quiet. Harrison stood up slowly from behind the desk. He walked around it and stopped in front of her, and she watched something in him come undone the way a knot loosens when the right thread is pulled. "I'm not going to tell you to go," he said. His voice was rough in a way she had not heard before. "Then what are you doing?" "I'm terrified," he said simply. "I'm terrified that I brought you into something that is going to hurt you, and I don't know how to stop it from happening, so I thought if I created some distance—" "I know how that sounds. It sounds like something I didn't ask you to do," she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, he crossed the remaining space between them, and she felt the shift in the air, the way you feel weather changing. She looked up at him, and something enormous was sitting in her chest. Pressing outward, she did something then that surprised both of them. She sank to her knees in front of him. Not in collapse, not in defeat. In something deliberate and open and so honest it filled the whole room. She looked up at him with every single thing she felt written plainly on her face, and she said, "I'm not asking you to protect me from your world. I'm not asking you to fix anything or fight anyone. I'm asking you for the chance to love you and for you to let me in. That is all I want. Just that." Harrison looked down at her, and she watched something in him break open completely, and what came through was not the CEO or the billionaire or the man with the cold father and the glass tower. What came through was someone who had been lonely for a very long time and was looking at the one person who had ever made the loneliness feel worth naming. He reached down and took both her hands and drew her gently to her feet, and when she was standing, he held her face between his palms and said, "You are the only real thing in my life, Emma Calloway. I don't want distance. I don't want protection. I want you." And then he kissed her for the first time, and it was nothing like anything she had imagined. And everything like coming home. The kiss changed things. Not in the world outside, which continued being loud and complicated, and full of Preston Blake's opinions and Patricia's, sideways glances and gossip columns that had somehow gotten wind of a story about the billionaire CEO and his waitress turned assistant. But inside the space between Emma and Harrison, something settled into place like a key turning in a lock that had been stiff for years. He told her everything that night over dinner, at a quiet restaurant where the lighting was low and the tables were far enough apart that you could actually hear the person sitting across from you. He told her about his father's calls and the board members in Celeste, and the pressure that had been building since the morning he walked into Millie's diner and decided not to leave. Emma listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment and then said, "What do you want to do?" He looked at her like the question surprised him, which told her that not many people asked it. "I want to keep you in my life," he said. "I want to stop apologizing for that." "Then stop," she said simply. Tom Gable, who was Harrison's lawyer and also his closest friend, and the person who had been telling him for 6 months that he needed to stop letting his father make decisions by proxy, came to the office the following Monday with a folder of documents and an expression of restrained satisfaction. "Your father has been talking to Celeste's family," Tom said, spreading papers across Harrison's desk. "There are preliminary conversations about a merger of interests," which is a very polite way of saying Preston wants you to marry Celeste for business reasons. Harrison looked at the documents with the expression of a man reading something in a language he knows but does not want to speak. How far has it gone? Far enough that Celeste's father believes there's an understanding. Not a formal arrangement, but close. There's no understanding. There never was. I know that. You know that. Preston is hoping you'll decide that Emma is not worth the complication before he has to have a real conversation with you about it. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Set up a meeting with my father. Here, not Connecticut. And get the board calendar. I want to know every voting member's position on the expansion proposal I've been sitting on. Tom raised an eyebrow. You're going to leverage the expansion. I'm going to remind them why they need me running this company and that my personal life is exactly that. Emma did not know about the board strategy or the meeting with Preston. What she knew was that something in Harrison had solidified, that the erosion had stopped and something more permanent had taken its place. She felt it in the way he stopped hesitating when he reached for her hand, in the way he started talking to her about the company, the way you talk to someone you are planning a future with. It's not just someone you are leaning on for the moment. She had her own battles to manage. Patricia had escalated from sideways comments to a formal complaint submitted to Human Resources, claiming that Emma had been given access to sensitive financial documents outside her clearance level. It was technically true that Emma had seen certain documents, but it was because Greta had assigned them to her, and Greta's authority covered that access entirely. Greta handled it herself. She walked into the HR office with a folder that contained every documented action Emma had taken in the 7 weeks since her start date, and she set it down and said in her precise, clipped voice that if HR chose to pursue the complaint, she would be required to explain exactly how a filing system that had been broken for 3 years had been repaired in 4 days, and why the person who repaired it deserved discipline rather than commendation. The complaint was closed by end of day, Emma found out from Diana, who had been tracking the situation from the diner with the dedication of someone following a sporting event she cared deeply about. Your scary assistant lady went to battle for you, Diana said over the phone. Greta? Emma said with something warm in her chest. She sounds like a general. She is. I'm going to bring her something from the bakery. Emma, you don't have a bakery yet? Then I'll bake something and bring it. She baked on Saturday morning, filling her small apartment kitchen with the smell of cardamom and brown butter, and she brought a tin of cookies to Greta on Monday and set them on her desk without ceremony. Greta looked at the tin and then at Emma and said nothing for a moment. Brown butter? She asked. And cardamom, Emma said. Greta opened the tin and took one and bit into it, and her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly towards something that might have been pleasure. You made these yourself? I've been baking since I was 12. Greta looked at her steadily. You should have a bakery. I know, Emma said. I'm working on it. Preston Blake arrived on a Wednesday. Harrison had arranged the meeting, but Preston had decided to arrive a day early, which Emma would later understand was a power move, an attempt to catch Harrison off guard and off balance. She was at her workstation when the elevator opened and a man walked out who had Harrison's height but none of his warmth, and who looked at the office like he owned it because once he saw Emma before anyone introduced them. He stopped in front of her workstation and looked at her with the assessing gaze of a man who priced everything. You're the girl, he said. Emma looked up from her work. I'm Emma Calloway, she said evenly. I don't believe we've met. I know who you are, he said it like knowing was an accusation. Then you have an advantage, she said pleasantly. Can I let Mr. Blake know you're here? Preston studied her for a moment longer, recalibrating slightly. Yes, he said. Tell him his father is here. Harrison came out of his office with the controlled expression of someone who had been preparing for a difficult conversation and was not going to let it happen in the hallway. He greeted his father with a handshake, not an embrace, and led him into the conference room. Emma focused on her work. She could hear nothing through the glass. She watched the shapes of the 2 men in the room, sharp gestures of Preston's hands, the still and deliberate stillness of Harrison's posture. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. When Preston came out, his face was closed in the way faces close. When a man has not gotten what he came for, but is not entirely lost either, he stopped at Emma's workstation again. She looked up. "My son tells me you're capable," he said. The word capable landed with the inflection of someone who has moved goalposts, but not abandoned the field. "Try to be," Emma said. "He also tells me this is not a temporary arrangement." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "It isn't." Preston looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she did not expect. He nodded once very slightly, the way a man who respects resistance gives acknowledgement without surrender. Then he walked to the elevator. Harrison was standing in his office doorway, watching. When his father's elevator closed, he exhaled once and then looked at Emma with an expression that was tired and grateful and something else. She was learning to read. She came to him that evening at the penthouse. He had cooked badly, which she found endearing. There was pasta that had been slightly overworked and a salad that was better. Then the pasta and wine that was excellent because he had more expertise. There they sat at his kitchen island, and she fixed the pasta without making a production of it, and he watched her move around his kitchen with an expression she recognized now as the one he wore when he was feeling something he had not found words for yet. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "Your father." Harrison turned his wine glass slowly. "I told him that I had spent 15 years building something he would be proud of, and that I was done building for that reason. I told him that the company would continue to grow, and that the board would support me because the numbers support me. And I told him that my personal life was going to include you, whether he made peace with it or not, and that making peace with it was in everyone's interest." Emma was quiet for a moment. "That must have been hard to say." "It wasn't," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "It was the easiest thing I've said in years, because it was just the truth." She reached across the island and put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and held it. "I want to tell you something," she said. He waited. "When I was on my knees in your office," she said, "I was scared. Not of you. Of wanting something that much. I have spent my whole life being careful about what I let myself want because wanting big things had always led to disappointment. But I wanted you enough to get past the fear and say it out loud, and I'm glad I did." His hand tightened around hers. "I'm glad too," he said quietly. "I also want a bakery," she said. "I want you, and I want a bakery, and I want mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and bread that makes people stop walking." He looked at her with the full weight of his attention. "Then let's build it," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Not my money," he said quickly, understanding the flash in her eyes. "Yours. I'll help you find the space and navigate the licensing, because that is a nightmare. And I have people who know that maze. But the money is yours, from your savings, and the bakery is yours. I just want to be there when you open the door for the first time." Emma felt the thing in her chest that she had been keeping, folded up small for years, unfold completely. It filled her from the inside out. "You're going to cry in my pasta," Harrison said. She laughed. It came out wet and genuine and completely undignified, and she did not care at all. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in April, Emma Calloway unlocked the door of a corner bakery on Hartwell Street. 4 blocks from Millie's Diner, 2 blocks from where a car had broken down on a Tuesday in October and sent a man with gray eyes, walking through a door that changed both their lives. The chairs were mismatched. The menu was on a chalkboard. The smell coming from the kitchen was brown butter and cardamom and the yeast. Warmth of bread proving in the back. Renee was there, tearful and proud, wearing her good coat. Diana was there with coffee from Millie's, which felt right. Greta was there. It's precise and slightly terrifying, and holding a tin Emma had given her 3 months ago, that she had apparently been refilling ever since. Tom Gable was there with his wife, and an enormous bunch of flowers that took up too much space. Harrison was there. He stood a little back from the rest, watching Emma move through the room with that ease she had, the practiced warmth that was not performance but simply who she was. He had watched her build this over 6 months with the same focused determination she brought to everything. The filing systems and the binders and the complicated personalities of the executive floor and the enormous complicated personality of his father, who had come around in the way that difficult men sometimes do, slowly and without admitting it. When the door was officially open and the first customer walked in, a woman with a stroller who had seen the sign in the window. Emma looked up from behind the counter and caught Harrison's eye across the room. He raised his coffee cup to her. She smiled. The big real one. The one she had given to customers at the diner, and to Diana at 2 in the morning, and to her mother every Sunday. But turned now toward him with something extra in it. The specific warmth reserved for the person who had sat at your counter and asked what was actually good and listened like the answer mattered. She had asked only for the chance to love him. He had given her that, and she had given him back something he had not known he was missing. The feeling of being known by someone who had no reason to be kind to you and chose it. Anyway, outside on Hartwell Street, the morning was ordinary and bright. Inside the bakery, it smelled like everything worth wanting. And Harrison Blake owned 8 companies and a private island and had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. Thought that this was the best place he had ever been in his life, and he intended to stay.